You know, I've really never been one to believe in conspiracy theories, and when I have, they're ones that I've made up myself, more like suspicions I've had, and more often than not, they end up turning out to be at least a bit true. Like, never 100% off the money. And I feel like this situation, and the conspiracy, the little personal, private conspiracy I've had about this for myself, has all but been proven now. And people are starting to really recognize how obvious it is, since people are far less biased against Kamala Harris than they were towards Biden. At least on the left. You see, a while ago, and by that I mean literally 3 years ago, I covered this story, and I've repeatedly brought this specific article up and these numbers when referencing mainstream left-wing media's obvious motivations when it comes to what makes them the most money. Here's the article. This is from 2021. TV news ratings, online readership, and viewership all plunge during Biden's first 100 days in office. During President Biden's first 100 days in office, weekly full-day cable ratings for CNN and MSNBC have been trending down, according to statistics from ratings company Nielsen. On average, 1.3 million household viewers were watching MSNBC in the last week of January, shortly after Biden took office. For the week ending April, the number was 868,000. This is in 2021, by the way. At CNN, those figures went from 1.2 million to 750,000. We can actually bring up the chart. They include... Wait, does this one not include the chart? Oh, well. Well, sadly, I don't have a visual chart to attach to it for you, but regardless, there's been a lot of reporting on this, going back to literally 2021, about how every single mainstream, left or right-wing media outlet took a massive hit, and independent ones too, took a massive hit after Biden took office. The fact was, Biden was a good president. A pretty damn good president. And a good president is bad for business when you're in the business of being sensationalist about what's happening to keep a 24-hour news cycle going. And, that 24-hour news cycle, having as many eyes on it as possible, is how you make money. Which is why my little conspiracy is that the supposedly close race between Kamala Harris and Trump is nowhere near as close as we think. Or as is reported by mainstream media outlets, that the closeness of the race is being heavily exaggerated by these media outlets to keep eyes on it, because it probably... Well, let me give you an example. This is an article that came out pretty recently, about a week ago, and it shows an example, an objective report example of Kamala Harris, not Biden, but Kamala Harris having a bias against her in reporting when it comes from left-wing outlets. Mind you, I complained about this stuff for the last years, as I've covered Biden's accomplishments pretty hardcore, and even finding articles that talk about Biden's policy accomplishments is hard, because I have to find them to talk about them and learn about them. When I can tell when news is hard to find, and any of Biden's accomplishments, some of the hardest news to find anything on, out of anything. It was fucking buried, and they're doing the same thing to Kamala Harris, because remember, MSNBC, CNN, all of these things, they lose if Kamala wins. It is just that simple, and they know it. They know what happened after Biden took office. Stability and the American people feeling safe and secure means they don't watch the news and they don't watch political content. It is not in their best interest. Which is why, according to MediaMatters.org, broadcast news mostly ignored Kamala Harris's proposal expanding Medicare to cover in-home healthcare for 15 million seniors. The major corporate broadcast news networks, ABC, CBS, NBC, largely ignored Vice President Kamala Harris's proposal to expand Medicare to pay for long-term in-home health service for seniors in the 2 weeks since she announced it. ABC, where Harris broke the news on an episode of The View, otherwise made only passing mention of the proposal, as did NBC, while CBS ignored it entirely. All told, this transformative expansion of Medicare garnered just 35 seconds of combined airtime across 3 of the largest broadcast networks in the last 2 weeks since she announced it. Mind you, this is massive. Like, this expansion of Medicare is huge, and the fact that these institutions have just decided, no, we're not going to report on it. We're not going to let people know. It makes me wonder how many more things like this have been happening for the last 4 years. How many more stories about, like, Biden's achievements have these organizations decided, we'll give it 20 seconds of attention, period. Because it's kind of bad for them if Dem voters think they're being represented. They need to feel angry and like they need to be locked in on the news and waiting for the next election, complaining about who's currently in power and wanting someone else. This situation is one in which these companies lose if Kamala Harris wins. And they're left-wing news media. But that is the case. Trump is very good money for these organizations. An October 11th KFF study estimated that 14.7 million Medicare beneficiaries, or nearly 23% of enrolled beneficiaries, could potentially benefit from this policy. KFF explained that under no current law, Medicare coverage of home care is quite limited, and that in-home care is extremely expensive, adding that existing Medicaid coverage rules are complex for in-home care. KFF additionally explained that this proposal would also expand Medicare to cover vision and hearing and end the Medicaid practice of recovering care costs from estates after patients pass away. Harris's proposal has received wide, dedicated coverage from numerous news organizations. This includes web-based stories from the major broadcast news networks. However, these networks have failed to air substantial coverage of her policy on their morning, evening, or Sunday news programs, which are watched by millions of people during the past 2 weeks. This is true. While occasionally they do have authors that will write articles about this, and that makes it easier for me to report on it because I like reading these articles, they're not talking about it on the news, like on TV, where shitloads of people are watching, shitloads of voters are watching. A previous Media Matters study found 0 ABC, CBS, or NBC evening news coverage of Harris's proposal on October 8th, the day she unveiled it on ABC's The View. We extended this study through October 22nd to encompass morning, evening, and Sunday news programs on ABC, CBS, and NBC. We found that 3 mentions of her policy proposal during this time frame, totaling merely 35 seconds. ABC's Good Morning America mentioned her policy for 12 seconds on October 20th during a news package on both presidential candidates. NBC Nightly News mentioned it for 16 seconds at the end of an October 15th news package on soaring home senior care costs, which this policy is specifically designed to address. Harris's policy received much more prominent mention in an online version of the story, which would have presumably enjoyed a fraction of the broadcast program's more than 5 million person audience. NBC also briefly aired Harris mentioning her policy for 7 seconds on the October 20th edition of Meet the Press. CBS News failed entirely to mention Harris's Medicare expansion policy on its morning, evening, and Sunday news programs. Then there's an area for methodology and everything. Now, this is just one, study, whatever you want to call it, one project worked on by Media Matters here to just look into the coverage of Kamala Harris's promises and her rhetoric. And isn't it interesting to you that left-wing media, or what we look at as left-wing media in this country, is so dedicated to trying to squeeze every last penny they can out of shitting on Trump, which, fair, that's good, that they aren't giving Kamala Harris the platform to even, they are not reporting all-encompassingly on the platform of the Democratic nominee. It's infuriating, actually, right? I'm not the only one who's pissed about this, and I can't be the only one who feels a little, a little validated, maybe, that perhaps the media has had a pretty blatant bias against Biden for years now, for no other reason than statistically and provably so and publicly known due to the Nielsen statistics. Biden has been one of the worst things for mainstream news and the 24-hour news cycle ever. They were so desperate, they had to publish thousands of stories about every gaffe, stumble, and misspeak from Biden. And it was so focused on, they overdid it so much, he ended up losing the nomination as the incumbent. This is like happened once before, I think, in US history, like once or twice. It's unprecedented. A good example of a supposedly left-leaning, quote-unquote, news outlet that fell to the desire for money. Last week, the Washington Post refrained from endorsing a candidate in the presidential race for the first time in 36 years. The decision was reportedly ordered by Jeff Bezos, the Post's owner and one of the richest men in the world. The Seattle billionaire, by the way, I passed the island that fucker lives on regularly, who owns Amazon, purchased the flailing newspaper in 2013 in a rare fit of civic duty. The blowback was immediate and substantial. Within 48 hours of the announcement, as many as 200,000 paying readers canceled their subscriptions to the already money-losing news organization, and according to reporting by NPR. Such withholding of revenue is usually more a symbolic message than a real threat to the viability of a company, but for the Post, which has been teetering for decades, any loss in subscribers is threatening. Hundreds of good journalists who had no influence on Bezos' decision remain unsure of the validity of their employer. Residents of the District of Columbia and much of Virginia and Maryland also rely on the Post for coverage of state and local issues, culture, and sports. All of this is threatened by Bezos' decision and the public uprising against it. He's destroying some people's local news by doing this. But yeah, for the first time in 36 years, during an election where one of the candidates is a fascist promising to destroy democracy, Jeff Bezos has ordered that the Washington Post does not endorse a candidate for president. Everyone's dropping Washington Post now. The fact that these companies can just do this, like they can tank the fines and the repercussions for this kind of stuff, if there are any. The fact that they can just do this, man, I cannot wait for the reports to start coming out after Biden's presidency about the rate at which Biden's gaffes were covered compared to the rate at which Biden's unprecedented accomplishments in politics were covered. Because I am willing to bet my left testicle at this very moment that there are going to be some stark findings. Like some real obvious bullshittery was going on the entirety of Biden's presidency. Not on his end, on the media's end. This entire story, these stories I should say, should really help to hammer home that while the whole fake news thing is bullshit, these companies absolutely have interests in how much attention they give to certain stories than others, and they want to focus on what makes the most money. And while they're not pro-Trump necessarily, they want Trump around to shit on. And helping Kamala Harris win too hard doesn't keep Trump around, does it? We'll see, though. Let's see how this race ends up going. Maybe they are accurately reporting the neck-and-neckness of this race. But if Kamala Harris ends up pulling a landslide victory out of this election, I think these companies are going to have a lot to answer for. Genuinely. A lot to answer for. Because they have been pushing the idea that this is a neck-and-neck race really hard. And there's some polling that is starting to suggest that that's not the case. They're pro-capitalist, so I'm not surprised that they'll take any opportunity. They can't screw people over and suppress the media. Yeah. I mean, I don't think it's like an agenda so much as it is just companies doing what companies do. They spend more time on what makes them money and less time on what doesn't make them money. But the problem is when the outcome of that is a bias against a candidate, like at least the better candidate, then it's worth calling out. At least I think so. Anyway, if you enjoyed this segment, found it enjoyable, entertaining, or even educational, then please consider hitting the thumbs up button. Every single like pushes my channel in real time in the algorithm out to new viewers and new fans, and helps my channel grow, so I really, really appreciate it, as does commenting. If you like and comment, it is like a wombo combo. I love it. Thank you so much to everybody who likes and comments. And of course, if you haven't already, consider subscribing and ringing the bell icon to turn on all notifications so YouTube actually tells you when I go live or upload a new video, because if you don't, they won't. And of course, follow my social medias, linked down below in the description if you haven't already, so you can see more stuff from me on other platforms, including joining my fan Discord, which is totally free to join. And I also host at least once a week game events, call-in streams, or watch parties there. And on top of that, I announce all my new uploads and streams too, so if you're in there and you got your notifications on, you won't miss a thing here. And finally, if you want to support me directly, help me keep the lights on and a roof above my head here at the Xander Hall studio, then please consider donating, subscribing, or gifting a sub on my website, xanderhall.com/live, or support me financially through YouTube, Twitch, Streamlabs, Stream Elements, Patreon, or buying merch through the Streamlabs link down below. But regardless of how you watch me, no matter what, thank you so much for watching, and as always, have a good one.